Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello, everyone. It's good to see you. Our latest episodes have been around AI and building, and a few of you got in touch with me. But what about the in-house practice? Is this gone or is it coming back? Because you had this great series and you haven't done them in a while. You know, I guess I was distracted like everyone else with the lure of AI. But yes, I love in-house lawyers, and I love what they do. And I most definitely love tech in-house lawyers. And today you are in for a treat. I have an amazing in-house tech lawyer, and we're going to talk about, yes, AI and many, many other things. So without further ado, Laura, I've been your fan for a long time. You have an amazing presence on LinkedIn. Folks should follow you because you share amazing content. And, please introduce yourself so they have an understanding of where you are and what you do all day.
Yeah, so I have been an in-house lawyer for just about all of my career. I found that I fit really well in the beginning, and currently I'm a senior legal director at Worksome, which is a Danish startup that helps you manage your contingent workforce. Prior to that, I've had, been to several firsts. So the first lawyer at an XR startup, the first lawyer supporting an R&D team, the first lawyer in Europe. So I'm really used to working in technology, building and scaling teams.
Oh, I love that. I love being the first because you really get a chance to set expectations and train people for the rest of their life what to expect in the future. It's a huge privilege to be the first because you set a tone for everything going forward. How did you get to where you are today? How did you get to be a tech lawyer at various technology companies and being many firsts?
Well, it was a winding career path. I would never say that I had a straightforward career path. When I first left law school, I wanted to be a sports lawyer because I was an athlete and I love sports. And so I did that for a while, but I actually found that it didn't suit my personality because you were doing the same thing every year and there wasn't a lot of change. And I really like change. I love technology. And that intrigues me. So I found my way back into technology through media. So I ended up working at Red Bull in Salzburg, Austria, and I was supporting the distribution of Red Bull Media House content. And when my husband and I moved back to New York from Austria, it was basically career-changing advice from one of the senior attorneys there who said, if you like working at Red Bull, you need to look at startups. Red Bull is a company that takes risks. I think that you're going to find the same environment at a technology startup, versus going from media to like going to a large network. That's really not going to fit your personality. And having grown up in Silicon Valley and always been a fan of technology and always been at the forefront of technology, it actually was the perfect fit. So once I went back to tech, let's say, back to my roots, I loved it and I haven't looked back.
Oh, where did you grow up?
I grew up in San Jose.
Okay. Well, you are a local kid, I guess. That's really cool. I didn't know that about you. I assumed you're European, but then when I talked to you don't have a European accent. So I was like, wow, how did she get there? But I guess that's through San Jose. That makes sense.
Yes, I do confuse people. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark. So when people look at me, they expect some sort of accent, and I can see them sort of like, are you American or what? Like, where did you come from? So I have fun with that when people
Oh yeah, I confuse everyone. Imagine how much fun I have when It is really interesting to have conversations when you don't meet people's expectations.
Exactly.
But let's focus on the conversation of working with developers. I actually haven't had an episode of working with developers. I think it's an increasingly important conversation, not just for lawyers who are at tech companies, but at every company, because essentially every company is becoming a tech company. So I'm just curious, when was the first time you started working with developers, and do you have a methodology or approach that you think lends to correct type of interactions and fruitful relationships?
Yeah. So the first time I really started working with developers was when I joined an XR startup at, I think it was like 30 people. So I was the first legal hire and building out the legal and compliance function. And that's when I had to learn about the product. And I actually shared an office with the CTO, who I'm still good friends with. And so there is where I learned, I guess everything about what it is to build a technology company and working with developers. And one of the women there was actually really great. And we ended up she would teach me. So once a week, we'd sit down for 15 minutes and I had my own GitHub page. And she would teach me like little, to do little different things and then give me some homework. So I actually started coding when I was at that company. And from that experience, I think like my first piece of advice, if you start working at a technology company or you start working with developers or engineers, is really building those relationships. So when I moved from the XR startup and I came to Unity as the first lawyer in Europe and the first lawyer to support the R&D department at a full time, my first focus was developing those relationships. Because often I think, people outside of the legal profession have a certain opinion or thought or stereotype us in a certain way. And so my first step is stepping in and trying to break that stereotype, letting them know, we're not that scary. We're people and we're interested in what you're doing. So I think that's probably that's the first approach or the first
I
step.
love that. I love that. Teach me something. That's a sort of universal way of connection and coming from a more humble place. I've had similar experiences and coded and from sort of simple thing to smart contract, which I think is somewhat simple unless you make them super complicated. And in the process, you sort of really get to know each other and build trust, which I think is very important. What is a step two in this?
After building relationships, just getting to know people, introducing yourself, I want to find out what they do. And so I think that's another sort of breaking a stereotype of lawyers is, what is it that you're in charge of? Like, can you show it to me and have a great curiosity and really sit down with them to understand what they do, what they're building, what their process is. And every time I've done this and said, I want to know about you, what you're doing, what you're building, they seem to be a little shocked, like, oh, I've not worked with a lawyer that's wanted to know so much about what I'm doing and what I'm building. But for me, it helps me do my job better. If I know who's building what and how they're building it, then I can fit in better and I can support them better. So that would be sort of step two, would be diving deep, right? Deep dive with the key people that you're working with. And then, while you're building those relationships, you also can figure out who can answer questions when you have them. So of course, I am not an engineer or developer by background, so I often have lots of questions. And sometimes they might be, let's say, what I perceive as less than sophisticated questions. I won't call them dumb, but there might be something that I don't want to ask in front of like a whole audience of people. So then I know who I can go to for certain types of questions, right? So to have that sort of, coach or someone, mentor, or someone that can answer your questions, I think is also key.
Yeah, I find that when people have an opportunity to share their baby and you are genuinely interested in their baby because they have all kinds of insecurity about, oh, what if the baby's ugly? And you sort of let them show and admire that baby and kind of partner up with them that way. I think it really does sort of help to set a tone of the relationship and really changes kind of the dynamic forward. So I like the approach of kind of tell me what you're building and why it's exciting for you. And the other thing I find that it really brings subject matter extroverts, meaning they may be introverted in general and prefer to spend time with the computer, but they come alive when they share their baby because it's so beautiful to them. And I really love those moments. It's often the moments that people remember and how they interact with you, and they keep coming back, in deciding who you are. Is there another step in getting to know the developers and working with them better?
One of the things that I found extremely helpful, especially let's say if you're working on understanding a technology or a product or a process or something that is complicated or that you fear you really don't understand, is to restate what they're saying in your own words using your own terms. So you can try to use their terminology, but restating it back to them, you can get instant verification of whether or not you're on the right track. So a lot of times when I'm listening to engineers and developers speak, I'm sort of translating it in my head into something that makes sense and is tangible for me. And then often restating that to them, I can get an indication of like, am I on the right track or am I completely in left field? Or also, did I use terminology incorrectly, right? And then it allows for more education. And then also sometimes when you do get it right, then they actually, they're impressed and you've given them confirmation that you're actually listening. So I think sometimes they might not feel listened to. So just this act of restating what you're hearing, is great for relationship building. It's great for verifying if what you understand is correct. And then also great for further educating yourself. So I found that to be a extremely simple but useful tool when speaking with developers and engineers.
Have you ever had sort of communication gone wild or wrong? And if so, with a developer or somebody technical? If so, what is sort of your way of putting it back on track, back to productive relationship, back to solving mutual problems, back to company succeeding?
My mind first went to
I
take
was
stock.
really hoping you don't tell me that it never happened to you.
No, no, I like to think that I'm a good communicator, but when you said that, my brain immediately went to stop slacking or stop emailing, right? Just stop whatever conversation you're having, typing whatever, communication that you're using at your company. So I found that the most miscommunication and like the most tense situations did tend to happen, over email or over Slack or over Teams. So then that's when you hit the pause button and say, okay, let's talk about this either in person or over video. That's where I think we ran into the most miscommunication. And interestingly, if don't want to necessarily stereotype a whole group because it also happens in law, but there are some people that might not understand how their communication is perceived, especially across, we'll say written communication on Slack or email. So they might not be intending for their message to be received the way that, let's say, I'm receiving it. So I've also run into situations where I've let people know, like, this is how your communication impacted me, and we actually at Unity, we had a leadership program where we gave feedback in a very structured way. And it was very helpful to have some of those conversations to actually tell people that their written communications was having the opposite or adverse impact. And sometimes those people had no idea. So that was also a good learning.
That's true. It also happens, to lawyers, because what I noticed is that people read communications from lawyers, um, including me sometimes, in the strictest voice, the kind of voice that I may never use or very rarely use, because they may come to a relationship with expectation or prior experiences with lawyers or whatever they've seen on TV or heard in popular culture. So I am known to sort of, oh, this is clearly not, I'm not heard the way I want to be heard. Let me just show up at this person's desk, pick up a phone, call them. And it's amazing how, seeing a face and actually hearing my voice with my tone as opposed to the one you imagined for me really makes a massive difference. Do you have other tips? You're seeing that the communication is not happening, besides sort of putting a pause button. Anything else do you think that is helpful?
Yeah, so this is more geared towards legal teams and how they document. And I actually learned it from developers. So from the developers and engineers I worked with, they were using asynchronous communication. And so what that is, it's preparing communications that doesn't have to occur in real time. So, right, this is synchronous communication. I'm saying something, you're immediately responding. It would be awkward if you said something and then I just sat here and didn't respond. So that's real-time communication, where asynchronous communication is meant to, you can send your message and then the recipient of your message can respond whenever they have time. So this is really helpful if you're working across time zones. So when I was at Unity, I was in Copenhagen, and most of the legal team and GC and leadership were sitting 9 hours ahead of me on the West Coast in San Francisco or in Seattle. So I had my whole entire workday where I wasn't able to communicate with those individuals. And then if I just sent them a very simple message, right? And then I'd wait for them to respond. And if they didn't give me all of that information, then I'd have to wait a whole nother day. So we're running into these cycles where it would take you days to answer a very simple question. So if you adopt an asynchronous communication culture, what you're doing is you're focused on documenting, and that could either be the written word, it could be videos, it could be PowerPoint decks, whatever way you want to communicate to be inclusive. But it is giving that person all the information that they might need, and you anticipating questions that they might have, and providing all of that to them with context, why, right? Giving them that information so that they can give you exactly what you need back. And it changes how you do meetings. You can have meetings for very specific purposes to be synchronous, but then you could also have meetings where afterwards someone who couldn't attend could attend the meeting and receive all of the benefits from it. I was running actually a product working group that was run asynchronously, where we did have meetings, but if you couldn't attend, you can contribute beforehand. So we would take in your information and analyze it, and then also you would get an update afterwards. So the idea is that you did not have to attend any of the meetings, and then our group would keep working whenever it was convenient for you, and we made sure that we didn't leave anyone out. So part of the really adopting this culture, one big component of it was making sure that there was time zone equity, right? That just because someone was, let's say, in APAC, we didn't want them to be disadvantaged any more than someone was in the United States. So it's really making sure that you're giving access to information to your whole entire team.
Time zone equity. I love that term. That's a cool term. Let me reflect on that. That's a good term. What are sort of the best practices for this asynchronous communication for lawyers?
What I really loved, I took it from Camp, which is now 37 Signals, and there's some other great companies. I think GitLab has also run asynchronously. You can see their manifestos, but one that really stuck with me is that in everything that you're doing, document it not only for the people who are working with you presently, but for any future colleagues. So if someone were to be onboarded to your team in 2 weeks, would they be able to pick up your slide deck or your meeting notes? Or, if you're using a knowledge center or knowledge repository, is there enough information for a new employee to be able to understand what you did and be able to access information? So it really comes down to documentation and putting together practices, including storing information, how you do that. It really transforms how a legal team operates if you're adopting these practices, assuming that you can run your business without always having to be like, hey, do you have time to jump on a phone call? So anytime you go into a meeting, you need to have an agenda, and you need to make sure, do you really need to have that meeting, or can that meeting be done over another medium where the participants don't actually have to be there? So it saves meetings for really critical situations where you need real-time communication, and then all the other sort of communications can be done asynchronously. It requires a lot of discipline and thought. So that's some of the challenges in this practice. is really having to think ahead and really having to plan ahead and be proactive. And that's extremely hard for in-house departments. As we know, a lot of in-house departments are reactive.
Yeah, yeah. And now I just had a deja vu on my in-house days when I felt like a firefighter. Oh yeah, which fire today? And am I dressed correctly for this? What are the benefits? I like actually focus. Asynchronous communication is sort of an amorphous term. I think when you discuss it as a sort of documentation that anyone can pick up and go forward, which I think is extraordinary critical in a startup, because no startup stays a startup forever. They either get bought, they go public, or they close doors. In either way, you may or may not be there through the end or through the next stage, and it's important for you to kind of work yourself out of a job. I think that's really the best practice. um, I think the asynchronous communication that you're advocating is even broader than that. And you alluded to best practices. What are sort of the main benefits other than this sort of time zone equity? I mean, clearly, when you are on 5 different continents, you have to be saving those meetings for important things. Otherwise, you will quickly become a persona non grata with your colleagues. But what are the benefits of sort of not just for companies that are on 5 continents, but we're all in the same state, no time difference. In fact, we're all neighbors. Are there benefits of asynchronous communication for that type of team?
Yeah, definitely, right? As you mentioned before, it goes back to documentation. So an example that you can do, it's again, right, tech companies use Slack. Like I've lived in Slack for years. And you can create all sorts of documentation for the most commonly asked questions for the legal team, right? So you actually are going to start to reduce some of when you start to document more and provide that to the business, then you're going to reduce the interactions and time spent answering questions from the business for the most frequently asked questions. We now are at a point where if you have really great documentation and knowledge management, you can then apply AI to help you do that, right? So then now you can actually use technology to then get more time back. So you're not stuck in Slack land forever answering the same questions in multiple different ways. You can actually use technology to help you to do that so they get more time back. So, I mean, ultimately, if we're using asynchronous communication and building documentation and we have that culture, we can then layer technology on top of that to get rid of manual tasks and then really be able to focus on the critical legal work and then move from that reactive to proactive position. And then, another great benefit is that it allows lawyers to manage their time better and to set expectation with their businesses. So then you are firefighting, but you have more control over how you're firefighting. In communications, if they're established properly with your business, it will give you time, to block out 2 hours to do some deep work rather than just sitting on Slack, constantly answering questions. So it also helps you set boundaries and enables lawyers to work in a way that works for them, whether you're a morning person or a night person, or maybe you have kids, or maybe you want to be a weightlifter and you need to do that at a certain time of the day, right? You can block out time and then just have your work go around that.
Yeah, we have a great comment from the audience around distributed teams, and even if you are in the same office, you're not always in the same room, and there's water cooler conversation and social capital building. That's when it's useful as well. I love your point around technology that could take that practice further. Do you have some specific examples that you mentioned AI? I tried to do an episode without doing AI. I think it's increasingly hard. So there, I got caught. I mentioned the word. Um, any specific examples?
Well, yeah. I'm just thinking of, well, if you took this simplest example, right? We use right now a legal team of two. We use DocuSign, and we're using DocuSign power forms for several different contracts that are repetitive but that change, right? So, right, we get again, you're at a startup, so you're like, okay, you start to see a pattern. Okay, this is what we're doing. We're going to build out the template, and then we're going to put it into a power form, so then it becomes self-service, right? In some situations, people would just keep having the legal department, receive the request, go into a template, put in the information. Instead, we've taken that work off of the legal team's desk and empowered the sales team to go ahead and in several different instances, if they have the right information, they get a pre-populated document that they can sign. If there's negotiations from the other party, then we have playbooks that can help with that. There is, not to bring up AI again, but there are some really cool, I would say, startups that I like coming out of Europe that have it so then you actually leverage AI. So one of them that I thought was great was Legal OS, where again, this is what in Slack. So the example that they use is, let's just say, a handbook. You have a policy handbook for all of your employees. The legal team spends 20% of their time answering questions about the policies related to working from anywhere. They actually use Legal OS and then help train their little chatbot, their little Slack chatbot on their policies and refined it. And that's really where you put in the bulk of time. But once you train it, you can then allow anyone from the company to ask questions. And these are complex questions, right? It's not just something simple that you can answer, but they're, if I went to this country for this long and I'm this nationality, can I work from there? And they were actually able to train it to answer those questions. So, there's still oversight from the legal team to make sure that generative AI is not answering incorrectly, but they've gotten it to a point where they can really trust it. And so now their legal team doesn't even have to do that anymore. So this is the idea, if you have robust documentation, right, can you train AI or build out templates without AI and just simply automate things?
Yeah, training on data and limiting that universe is actually key, and then patiently going through the feedback loop to make sure that you sort of correct the outlier questions or a propensity to hallucinate or other things is definitely critical. I love That's a great example, by the way, because it's amazing how many ways you can ask the same question and spend the entire day answering that question and I feel productive because you just answered gazillion questions, but then look at what actually matters to your enterprise and realize that you done absolutely nothing. So I that's a great example, and I love the way you talked about it. Let's talk about the challenges of asynchronous communication. What is sort of for the legal team? What is the main one or two struggles you've seen, and how can they be addressed?
Well, I think probably the first big struggle, right, especially if you're a reactive legal team, is finding the time to do that. It is time intensive, and it's a habit that you have to develop, right? Rather than just pinging someone on Slack to just get an answer back, right? Being more thoughtful about like, oh, I wonder if that information is somewhere else. If I can find it, let me do an analysis first. So then I ask like a very specific question, or just, if you, again, being at a startup, if someone asks me a question, I'm probably going to get that question asked of me several times. So let me take an additional half an hour or hour to sit down and write out something that then I can give to people rather than continually answer the same question. And the team has to be empowered to do that, right? So you're going to be a little bit slower in responding, and that's going to freak the sales team out probably. So
There are many things that freak the sales team out. This is one of many, so I'm sure they will leave, Laura. They will.
And it's really, for me, it was also about getting rid of this instant expectation of instantaneous response, right? That pulls people out of work. And as lawyers, we sometimes need, an hour or 2 hours or however long to really be deep into something to make sure that we do it properly. And so being allowed to let the business partners that hey, these are the times that I work, or these are my office hours, or even blocking out on your calendar. This is my deep work. I'm not going to answer questions for these 3 hours because I'm going to be completely focused on something else. But, right at noon or right at 1, I'll be back and I'll answer all of my email and my Slack questions. Again, it takes discipline. It takes empowerment. and setting boundaries with the teams that you support so that they understand and they can support you and how you want to work, because you'll be more effective that way.
Yeah, I also find consistency is important. Not making exceptions for anyone, including the CEO.
Yes.
Because the road, once you start making exception, at some point it's hard to stop. But if you're sort of consistently, I'm in this channel, not that. I'm available at this hour, but not that, and you follow that rule no matter what happens, people learn. It's amazing. It's a little bit like training a puppy. If you're consistent and trained yourself, your puppy will be great. But your puppy will be confused if you kind of change things up, follow your mood, follow the weather. Then, of course, your puppy will not be trained and will not understand the best practices. We're coming to the end, and I do want to talk a little bit about sort of changing landscape, the way it affects legal practice in house, and I guess what can an in-house lawyer, independent of whether they're in the beginning, middle, or end of their career, what can they do to thrive long term?
Oh, that is an excellent question. Well, I think going back to your puppy example, what I have learned, I like to call myself a recovering people pleaser, right? So what I have learned and has been the most helpful for me is setting boundaries and sticking to them. That's especially important, right? All the companies I've worked at since I've been in Denmark have had offices in the US. And so that makes it a challenge for when can you take meetings. Denmark is a country that is very homogeneous and everyone does everything at the same time. And so, picking up kids at 4 o'clock, that's when that happens. And then you sit down and you do dinner. So it is blocking out the 4 to 8 p.m. time, because that's for your family. And then, of course, occasionally you can make very rare exceptions if you need to. But otherwise, training your team about what's important to you, what are your boundaries, because otherwise, speaking from experience, I have let that erode, and that is not great for mental health, to be working, from like 8 o'clock in the morning to 9 p.m. at night. I do not advocate for that. It's not great for anyone's mental health. And it also leads to worse work product. So definitely I am an advocate for boundaries and rest to make sure that you can come to work and be your best self.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing things happen when you get an 8 hour sleep. It is kind of magical, but it's remarkable how much more pleasant and productive and joyful I really am after 8 hours sleep as opposed to 6 or less. I can't stand my own company, so I can't expect others to want to be with me. So yeah, those things are important. I love that. Maybe last question around sort of tools and practices. If you are sort of looking at a career for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years in house, clearly transforming, what skills, what tools, what maybe even mindset shifts do you think an in-house professional, and I'm deliberately using in-house professional because in-house legal teams are increasingly not just lawyers, should be picking up, provided that, of course, I do think that legal knowledge is sort of table stakes. What other things need to be developed, picked up along the way to succeed long term?
I definitely think it goes back to communication. So we've talked about asynchronous communication, but again, to go back to the topic that you're trying to avoid, I use generative AI in my practice daily, and so does my general counsel. And it's something that we are getting, even if we just save 2 to 3 or say 5 minutes a day, right? That adds up in the long term. Or if you're tired towards the end of the day and you can't think about this, something that you want to structure, generative AI is great for that. So I think it really is becoming comfortable using technology and understanding how to communicate with it. So I work with lawyers on the side, both in-house and law firms, about how to use generative AI. I love playing with it. So I try to play with it to get the best results. And often lawyers will sit in front of it and like not know what to do. And I think lawyers have the best skill set to use generative AI because we do client intake, we do depositions, we have critical thinking skills, we know where we want to go, and we just need to learn how to communicate that in a way. And it's using natural language, not being scared of, and trusting technology. So, doing communication in a way that helps benefit the whole team, right? Getting the information out of your head and onto documents for in-house teams, because often we skip that step because we don't have time, but that's critical. And that is critical for using technology and then learning how to use technology, right? And all of those ultimately revolve around communication and how you communicate. So I think those are going to be skills that the in-house teams will need.
To be clear, I wasn't trying to avoid AI. I think it's ubiquitous technology like the internet. So it is here to stay. And it is like eager to please puppy. You feed it junk, it will make a mess, but feed it good stuff and it will fetch you slippers. And I've trained many puppies to fetch my stuff. So that does work. And I think that patient iterative approach, I use Gen AI all the time with various providers, both proprietary and private and public. And absolutely, there are many ways to automate your life, your career, your practice. And if you are, a knowledgeable operator, you can definitely make the most out of it. In fact, I think you're in the best position to drive to better results. Laura, this was a fantastic conversation. I promise you that we'll continue the AI conversation because we recently published a book together and 40 other contributors. And we will have a deeper dive in AI. That is to come. I definitely want you to share your insight. But today we covered a lot of ground, and I really love your tips about communications, working with developers, tips for the future, the whole 9 yards. That was really amazing. What is the one thing you want to make sure that folks take away from this conversation? Sorry, just one.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to pick one that I haven't talked about yet then. I think this is also coming from working on tech partnerships and co-development deals. But as a lawyer, please use the products that your teams are building, or at least get them to show you how they work. Like, just have a basic understanding of the technology that you're working with and providing advice on. That would definitely, I think, go a long way to help you in your career, and then also help you while you're working with lawyers on the other side who might be frustrated sometimes when other in-house lawyers don't have an understanding of how a product or how a technology works. So that's kind of more selfish.
No, that's a great tip. Not only should you know and use it, you should love it, really. It really does. You show up differently as a professional, as a lawyer, if you actually believe in the cause and love what is being built. And then if you, bonus to you, incorporate it in your legal practice. Not everything is incorporatable in your legal practice, but if you find a way, I find that when I was able to do that, I built a long-lasting relationship with every member of my team. Laura, thank you so much for the great insight, and thank you everyone for joining. Yes, the in-house episodes are here to stay. If you want to join me because you're in-house professional, let me know. If you want to hear it from somebody else and to be part of this conversation, let me know as well. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.